Today's show is sponsored by Snowflake, the only data warehouse built for the cloud. Today, organizations need the agility that rapid data insights bring to stay a step ahead of the competition. With Snowflake, you can instantly and infinitely scale your data warehouse with the touch of a button, delivering deep insights at any time for all your users. So start your journey today towards data-driven decision-making by going to snowflake.com/cloudcast. That's snowflake.com/cloudcast.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios this week. And Aaron, it is good to have you back. We have a big milestone ahead of us.
Yeah, absolutely. We are one show away. I'm just shocked. Just so you know ahead of time, I am just shocked.
I know. We are, for those of you that don't totally know what we're talking about, maybe you've joined the show over the last year or even 2 years, we have hit basically the 400 show milestone. So we're going to, we couldn't come up with just one sort of topic to do for 400. So we're going to do a little thing. We're going to steal from the ESPN concept and we're going to do 4 for 400. So we're going to kind of give you 4 shows that we think kind of symbolize or recognize the stuff that we talk about on the show. About half are going to be about technology and half are going to be about, kind of your careers and career paths and things that people have done. So looking forward to doing those 4 with you, man.
Yeah. And I'll add this real quickly as well. And for those that have been around and remember it, first of all, kudos and thanks for listening for so long. But we always, every time we hit one of these 100 milestones, we're always like, we need to do something really big. And then we always start off with let's have a bunch of people on and talk about a bunch of stuff. And then I don't know if you remember our show 100, but it was in the San Francisco office, the Cisco office across from Moscone, and there was a whole bunch of people in the room. And let's be completely honest, it wasn't one of our best shows.
No. We don't do crowdsourcing very
well, and it was a train wreck.
Oh, yeah,
and so now we're okay, we learned, but every time we're 200 and 300 and 400, we're like, well, let's do that, and then we're like, no. So we're trying something new here.
Yeah. So I think folks are going to like these shows. Aaron and I are going to do a little preview for them, and then we're going to get to the interviews. Normal length shows, so don't worry. Maybe slightly longer, but it's all good. Help you mow your grass a little better. So I thought the first one we're going to have Joe Emison, who is one of the people who we really love to talk to about kind of next generation application development, sort of the future of how things are being built. Joe's got a ton of background in doing serverless stuff and all. And so I thought kind of to preview that, we would talk a little bit about just we started the show in 2011, how far the industry's come in just this short 8 or 9 year window.
Yeah, it is absolutely amazing to think back, not just in the history of this podcast, but when AWS launched, when Google App Engine launched, right? This entire industry that we're talking about and all of the listeners follow, and a lot of us are starting to build, entire careers and practices around. This is all maybe 10 years-ish old. That's pretty amazing when you really step back and think about it. And way back when, right? AWS had enough or so few services you could fit them on the console, and there was some space and you could figure out which ones were which.
Yeah, I looked at it. I went back and I made a bunch of notes. I'll put them in the show notes. If you went back to say 2011, basically what you had was Amazon, AWS existed. It had about 15 services at the time. Google App Engine was the only part of Google Cloud. Azure didn't exist. Well, Azure had just launched. So you had those 3 behemoths were just barely in their infancy. On the enterprise side, you basically had converged infrastructure was beginning to be a thing. That VCE, VMware, Cisco, EMC conglomerate was all put together, and obviously now that doesn't exist at all anymore. Nutanix was still kind of an appliance for VDI. And then the PaaS companies, or the PaaS concepts, the Cloud Foundries and OpenShifts were just beginning. So that was basically the genesis of where we started this show from, which was, is any of this stuff, it was make things easier for people, but there wasn't clear winners and losers and all that way back then.
Yeah. And we got to see, before Docker was Docker, if you go back in our archives and do a search for the Cloudcast and .cloud, because .cloud was Solomon's company that ended up spinning into or out of and created Docker. And we'll probably end up talking about it at some point here, but, kind of the wave that was both, OpenStack and Docker and some of these other technologies. I mean, it is really amazing to see how far this industry has come in that amount of time.
Yeah, it's been pretty amazing. I went back and looked at the Gartner Magic Quadrant, which, we used to talk a lot about the Gartner Magic Quadrant, especially for like IaaS for years and years, and who was going to win and who was on there. These are some of the companies that were in the upper right-hand corner in 2012, so even almost a year after we started. So Amazon was on there, Amazon Web Services, Terramark, Savvis, CSC, Dimension Data, Tier 3, Rackspace, and Joyent. All those companies were considered the absolute leaders at this time. Google didn't come on the list until 2014, Microsoft not till 2013, and IBM, Oracle in 2017, Alibaba in 2018. So stuff can move very, very quickly and change very, very quickly.
Yeah, and it's really fascinating. Again, go check out the graphic in the show notes. But I forgot, Blue Lock and SoftLayer and Fujitsu, and like it's really just fascinating to see some of these kind of point in time snapshots.
Yeah, and you do go back and you think about some of the things that people were talking about way back in the day of like, oh wow, Amazon invested $500 million this quarter, or $250 million this quarter in building out their cloud. Like, oh, that's going to be a big deal. And people were like, it's not that much money. And then the next year it was like they invested $1 billion this quarter in building out their cloud, and people were like, yeah, but they still only have $500 million in revenue. And now you look at it. Here's the other number that kind of blows me away. So VMware at the time was a $3 billion company, 2011, 2012. They're now a $9 billion a year company. So they've grown 3 times.
Yeah.
Amazon had not yet reached $1 billion, or they were roughly at $1 billion. They're now a $30 billion company. They've grown 30x in that same time frame. So kind of crazy how stuff has shifted from say on-prem to public cloud, and kind of the perception of some of these companies. I remember sitting at some event, I think it was VMware's Partner Exchange, when one of the guys, it wasn't Pat Gelsinger, but one of their leaders basically got up there and told all the partners, if we ever lose an application to that bookseller, we will never get it back. It's proven to be pretty true, buddy. Proven to be pretty true.
Yeah. There's some weird bedfellows in the industry that have created on top of that as well. But yeah, I mean, it is amazing. And I'll add this as a quick personal one too, before we kind of close out and get Joe on here. I was VCE at the time, right? And the highlight or the cutting edge architecture at the time was, converged infrastructure with some kind of manager of managers on top of it. And we were talking about service portals and catalogs and, all of this automation of all of these this infrastructure things. And, we weren't even necessarily even thinking or talking about, APIs necessarily at the time, right? Yeah. It was all about a portal and still manually clicking everything. The provisioning was there, but not necessarily what ended up being this API being the ultimate driver of all of this automation.
Yeah, no, we were very focused on all that converged stuff. Actually, for anybody who remembers the show way back in the day, the original title for the show for about 45 minutes.
Oh no, you're going to bring it up? Oh no.
The show was originally called Two Guys and One Wire. Yeah. And then somebody told us that was a bad name.
Yep. Thank you, Stu.
Exactly. Well, look, dude, yeah, good times. So with that, let's wrap up sort of the first of our 4 for 400. We're going to get to Joe Emison. Joe's going to always gives us a great set of insights, a great set of kind of perspective on building this stuff for real. And man, I'm looking forward to the next 100.
Yep, absolutely. Today's show is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and more. What I really love about DigitalOcean is their focus on developers. With the DigitalOcean Marketplace, get started in minutes and don't worry about infrastructure. Plus, DigitalOcean's community provides over 2,000 tutorials to help you stay up to date on the latest open source software, languages, and frameworks. Get started on DigitalOcean for free with a free $100 credit at do.co/cloudcast. That's do.co/cloudcast.
And we're back. And, as we talked about in the intro, we're doing this as one of the first of our 4 for 400 shows. Really excited to be sort of talking about what we think might be coming next. Obviously this show has always sort of trended towards looking at what's a little bit further out in the horizon, looking maybe a year, 2 years out, and some of the bleeding edge technologies and some of the companies and people that are shaping that. So we thought we would bring back one of our favorite guests and somebody who doesn't pull any punches and really lets us know kind of from a reality perspective, what's real, what's working, what he's doing in his world. So very excited to have Joe Emison back. Joe is now co-founder and CTO of Branch Insurance. Joe, good to have you back on the show.
It's great to be back. Thank you very much.
It is. It's been a little while. We have this thing where we feel like we talk to people, and it's only been a few months, and we looked, and it's been almost 2 years since we talked to you the last time. You've shifted companies. Before you were helping to work on building stuff. Building in the sense of like build facts and companies and contractors. You've shifted that focus a little bit. Tell us about your new company and what you've co-founded or what you're in the process of co-founding.
Yeah, so in the process of building out the first ever home and auto insurer from scratch. So every other personal lines insurance company that sells home and auto has started with one and not the other. So we're launching both, and we are bundled home and auto insurance powered by community. So it's been a wonderful thing. I sold to insurance companies at BuildFacts, and I got to team up with a guy who I had sold many times to, who's just a wonderful person, wonderful human being, and a great business mind. And so we're looking forward to launching this year.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Yeah, we did some stuff around insurance tech with some stuff we were doing with MetLife last year. So we got a peek into what are some of the things people are trying to do to shake up that industry a little bit. So we'll be excited to see what you're doing with it. The last time you were on, and for folks that were maybe not listening to the show back then, we'll put it in the show notes. It was back on episode 242, so it has been a little while. We were just starting to get into serverless, and you had been using some of the serverless technologies, Lambda, but some of the other ones for a while as part of your last company. You gave us some really good insights, kind of not just, it's not just about, it's cheap compute or you could scale it to zero. You were really talking about the shift in how applications developed. It's been a couple of years now. I assume, you were super passionate about it back then. I assume you're still following a similar model. Kind of what have you seen tech-wise that's, about how you're building applications these days that is helping you have a competitive advantage?
Yeah, it has been it's been a great past few years, and yes, I'm still very much a proponent of serverless. Although I have learned a lot of things, made mistakes. Maybe it's probably worth just starting by saying that I think that there are a lot of people who are building things serverlessly that aren't getting much benefit from them or doing it not in great ways. I think it's like with any technology, I think it's possible to use it incorrectly. And I think in general, as an industry, the software development industry, that is, we are very bad at figuring out what we're optimizing for and knowing that and aligning on that with the rest of the people in our organization. And so I think we make all sorts of silly decisions. And so, a lot of my focus is really on what I really care about focusing on, and then implementing it in the best way possible, which I think serverless is, the option for the future. So I'm happy to dive into any of those details. Let me just pause there for you.
Yeah, no, I think it's helpful. I think, a lot of times, depending on where you come from in the stack, if you come from the infrastructure side, you look at serverless as, okay, it's the new way that infrastructure is going to kind of get done. And I know just from watching, whether it's you or Paul Johnson or anybody who's really deep into the serverless side, the shift in thinking has really moved, especially from an application perspective to, this is all about almost drawing a really straight line between some business function you have, a cost of the business or a thing that you can make money in the business, and a literal function, and to be able to get really granular about that. And that's a totally different way of thinking about IT and application building. It's not technical debt anymore. It's not, capacity. It's just, what's your business? How do you make money? How do you profit on that? Or what does it cost? And what does the software need to do to be a part of that? So I'm really interested how is that kind of how you see things, and what are some of the underlying technologies that maybe make that happen or better these days?
Yeah, I think that is a good way to think about it. I mean, and maybe expanding on that slightly. I mean, if you think about where we've come, like the last 20, 25 years, I think we reached this point where we realized software is eating the world. Every company is becoming a software company, and therefore our ability to develop software is for many companies is your growth engine, or maybe just survival, right? I think there's a good case to be made that Netflix is the company that it is because Disney was just unable to build what Netflix built at the time Netflix built it. So I think we have this amazing relationship between software development and business growth, but because of how complicated it has been to develop software, and because the requirements for software are ever increasing, we've had to have at an organizational level all of these different talents, right? We've needed the software developers, but we've also needed a whole host of systems administrators, network administrators, database administrators, right, and infrastructure, operations, et cetera. And those have all had to have been in-house specialties in the same way that some companies had their own power plants 100 years ago or more. And so what we've seen, I think, with the cloud is this increasing reduction in the number of in-house specialties we have needed to have in order to deliver world-class software and deliver that business value. And what we've also done is we've shortened this chain where the business says, makes a decision and says, we need this thing to grow. We need this software development to grow. And it involves, like 150 people in like 30 different departments versus, can we get back to a place where those can be small? Because when they're smaller, they're faster. They have fewer less communication overhead. You're more agile. All of those things. And so, in my view, what serverless is doing is it's continuing this path where we no longer need a lot of these in-house specialties. And so, another way to think about it is, this is an analogy that's sort of coming up on Twitter now, which I think is a very good one, which says, if you go back 10, 15 years ago, you can say, well, we're starting to use frameworks like Ruby on Rails or Django in order to cut out a lot of the undifferentiated repetition that was required in software development. And I think the best way to think about serverless is that it's yet another sort of iteration on that framework concept of something like a Ruby on Rails or Django, except that now it includes infrastructure. And it includes all of the aspects of infrastructure. It includes patching, it includes scaling, it includes failover. All of these things get included. And so you end up shortening this path where it's possible for like a business lead plus a designer plus a developer to actually just launch a product in the same way that is possible with an app that doesn't have a back end, or that it was possible for small business applications pre-internet when you were just making, standard desktop applications. We're getting back to a place where we can do that, but now there are these highly scalable, always online applications. Yeah.
So I'm curious, you talk about certain things that helped push us past things from a simplicity perspective. One of the great challenges that every technology has, or one of the great, burdens that engineers tend to have, is they always want to know what goes on under the covers. They want to know what happens. And the more we move to services that do things for us, I guess there's a part of people that go, oh, I lose that. I don't know what's going on. Certain decisions or opinions are made for you. How have you in your engineering team shifted from that, hey, what's going on under the covers, to, okay, I'm going to take what they give me, I'm just going to accept that and kind of work around that? Like, how has that mindset shifted for you in terms of just helping people feel comfortable with, you won't always know everything, but the trade-off is, you probably didn't need to know that stuff?
Yeah, this is a great question. I call this the touch and feel your servers problem. because, this was the problem for cloud, right? Which was like I like to touch and feel my servers, which was never any value add to the organization. Or maybe at some point it was like free, good co-location facilities. It's a great question. I mean, the shortest answer is I tend to hire front-end developers, and that as a primary choice, and not. I mean, I don't have any pure back-end developers in branch today, and I haven't hired one in a while. And that's not to say that I won't, but my need for that. I end up doing most of the back-end development, and the front-end developers do back-end development as well, because it ends up being a lot simpler within this paradigm. I do think that there's a real challenge to wanting to know how things work under the hood. The way that I have handled that when I've run into it when consulting is usually I use an example that people don't really care about what happens under the hood. And I think Twilio is a great example of this, because people know it. I actually, back in the early 2000s, bought telephony cards and built an IVR machine, multiple IVR machines, and shipped them to building departments who were using our IVR. So I remember having to order those cards. I wrote Windows software that ran on those telephony cards. It was a nightmare. But I've never known a developer using Twilio for SMS or other telephony things to really care what goes on behind the hood. So I generally like to bring that up as an example. I think Cloudinary is another good example. I genuinely don't think that anybody using Cloudinary, I think once you use Cloudinary, you don't go back to image magic. It just doesn't make any sense. And again, I've never known a developer to do that. I could give you other examples where people have a much harder time with them. But I actually think that this is a latent issue that has to do with how a lot of technologists, or some technologists, define their identity. So I've often said, if your title is Oracle DBA or SQL Server DBA, your identity is tied to a vendor and a technology. And I don't think that that's good. I think that your organization will never stop using that technology while you're there. Or you'll have to, you need to change your title, right? And I think there are, I see on Twitter, a lot of people who are pretty big serverless doubters tend to have in their Twitter bio something like Linux freak or systems administrator, or they're defining their identity by the use of certain technologies that fundamentally development in serverless doesn't require an organization to have that as an internal specialty. And so I think that it probably makes sense to go back to that root cause as opposed to trying to answer what I think is really a pretextual concern around, well, I really need to know how it works.
Yeah.
This is all not to say, you shouldn't use unstable services, and there are absolutely unstable services that you shouldn't use. But there are plenty of wonderfully scalable, available services that have much better uptime than anybody, in-house could deliver to you, and that you shouldn't have any concern about how they do things.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense, and it does. It's like you said. It's sort of when you lead the question in that direction, it gets people to sort of want to be defensive and, well, I should know these things. And like you said, if you keep it focused on what are we trying to do to improve the business, and ultimately, like you said, for a lot of people, being able to be less specialized on a certain specific technology or a vendor's technology actually will probably free them up quite a bit in the future. Let's sort of go ahead.
I was going to jump in. Jesse Frizzell, I think, has a great comment, which is your job should be you should find people who automate themselves out of a job and then just keep giving them jobs. Yeah. And that's the promise of technology and software. It lets you do that. And if that is your attitude and mindset, then you will do very, very well. But if your mindset is I know a technology and I use that technology, the industry just moves too quickly for that to be a really beneficial position to be for your, for the organization you're working for.
Yeah. Well, let's sort of flip it around a little bit. You talk about kind of combining, say, front end developers with business analysts and so forth. Obviously, when you do that, there's a little bit of some translation that has to happen, right? The business analysts, the product managers kind of know from a business perspective, what do they want to do? Here's the customer experience I want. Here's the thing that we're trying to put in front of a customer. How do you find that some of these new serverless types of services, I know you introduced us to like Netlify the last time you were on. I think there's a bunch of others that have come along. How well are they adapting themselves to kind of present themselves as more business centric than just the technology behind it? Like, because there's got to be some way that the translation's not such a big gap from somebody going, here's what I want to do. It's the back of a napkin or a spreadsheet to how do we make that work technology wise?
I love this question, and maybe my answer will surprise you. I mean, I would say 2 years ago, I was a much bigger fan of the low-code, no-code platforms, which I think do fit into the serverless paradigm. But today, I'm a much bigger doubter of them, actually. Actually, the way that I believe that the business should deliver requirements to development, it would be agnostic of whether you were serverless or not. And I think that's one of the that's an important aspect of how I view serverless. So I mean, I think you need good product managers. You need to run good kickoffs. You need to have great designers. We have a fabulous designer your designers need to make complete designs like in InVision with Zeppelin to give the developers like exactly what they're going to implement. You need to test it as much as you can with the public, and you need to run usability tests as soon as you have it fully usable to make sure that it works. And then part of all of this obviously is also aligning the business and helping the business understand I don't really like that separate term, but I think everybody knows what I mean when I say, the business, helping the business understand that they're not the authority on what's right and what needs to be done. It's the customer, the end user who's the authority. And so our goal is always to put up our best hypothesis that we can develop in a reasonable amount of time. And then we validate through usability testing with the customer, and then we iterate off those tests. And so if you get everyone aligned on that and everyone participates in those usability tests and you have that full designer, that's a set of specifications that can go to anyone. And that's one of the reasons why I love front-end developers is because I do a lot of front-end development. I think you gotta do the hard work to implement the interfaces that are exactly the interfaces you need. And so again, when I look at like a low-code or no-code platform, what I see are ultimately things that you run into real development velocity problems when you're trying to implement the things that are really usable. And so I think for like internal development, those things are fine. Like I think something like Airtable is beautiful for an internal tool where you're going to train people how to use it, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the most usable thing. But I think if you're actually developing product for end users, especially consumers, but even B2B interfaces, I mean, I just don't think they allow you to do what you need to do to build a product that you're going to want to build.
Interesting. Yeah, no, it's definitely a space that I think talks about a lot of promise, and then it'll be interesting to see how that comes along. I know there's some companies that are planning to do some more low code things, and I think the premise is the more people we can have that kind of translate business ideas into something that's software. But yeah, like you said, the reality is does it actually work?
So to mention a specific company here in the space that I think is here's a thesis for you. So I've used a lot of the low-code, no-code platforms, and they've all been dissatisfying to me for end-user product. However, I recently saw a product called DraftBit, DRAFTBIT. And what's really interesting is the approach they've taken to this kind of lower-code interfaces. And so what they've done is they've basically built a simpler abstraction layer on top of React Native that is quite easy for designers to use, but it essentially compiles into React Native. And so if you think about a process where React Native is an abstraction layer on developing native apps, and then you build another abstraction, and again, it compiles down to native apps, right? React Native compiles down to native apps. So if you think about it, another abstraction layer on top of React Native that compiles down to React Native, but that is simpler and again has more sort of rails around it, but it's like limiting things that a lot of people don't care about. I think that's a much more stable and much more promising route to go as we're trying to reduce the amount of code. The other thing is it creates this great learning curve where most of the low-code, no-code platforms, like if you learn them really well, there's nowhere to go. Like you could like learn how to do development on the side that you could like maybe plug into them, but it's not a path. But the interesting thing with something like DraftBit is you could like learn DraftBit, you'd kind of learn how React Native kind of does things because it's an abstraction on React Native. And then if you said, well, I need to do things that DraftBit doesn't let me do, then you'd have this interesting aspect where you could then learn React Native and it would be an iterative path. And so you'd have these much smaller learning curves as you learned your way to, potentially like full native app development, which every React Native developer ends up having to do some native code usually. And so I think that pattern is much more promising, and I would expect to see those be much more successful than like something that's trying to abstract the whole process away from you, but instead this kind of ladder step abstraction to reduce the code and put more rails around things. I think it makes a ton of sense.
Interesting. So one last question before we wrap up here. The new company is really kind of trying to reestablish the home and auto bundling. You talked a little bit about, hey, it was one model years and years ago. It's kind of evolved. You're trying to reestablish kind of the origins of it. How much do you find that having the experience you do of having built applications in these new ways that are much less technical debt, much lower cost, is going to help you kind of get into these businesses that have big incumbent players, or is there still kind of this mix of you've got to find a better business model plus you've got to be better at the technology to be successful?
I love this question too. So the big incumbents in insurance, their systems are like huge albatrosses on them. Insurance is this notoriously like annoying, let's say highly regulated industry, and the regulators are great for the industry and great for the consumers, but there are different regulations in every state. And so it ends up being this sort of amazing challenge. And then as an insurance company, you release new products. And so you end up having all of this essentially bespoke code all over the place. And so the incumbent players have such an albatross around their necks with their technology. They just have a very hard time getting anything done quickly. So honestly, just showing up and not having any of the legacy policies and products and being able to introduce new products on new technology is an enormous advantage. And you can already see it in other insurance startups in the space, is that they're just able to develop features much faster. In terms of serverless, I mean, I think that our agility and our ability to bring new things into market will exceed anyone who's not serverless. So even insurance startups, largely because we need fewer people to make decisions, and there's just less work to be done and less code to be written to release new things. And one thing that we've done that I didn't realize how impactful it would be is, so our stack is we've got a JavaScript framework on the front end, we have a GraphQL API, we have JavaScript on the back end, and we store in DynamoDB, which is essentially JSON document store, you could think about it. And if you think about what's happening here, the object that exists in the programming language on the front end is has the same schema, same object as the API, which has the same schema and object that's in the back-end code, which has the same object and schema that's stored in the database. And if you think about a standard application that might be written today, even by a startup, you might have a JavaScript framework on the front end, a RESTful API, something like Ruby on Rails as your back-end code, and then a relational database as your data storage. And every single one of those steps of the way requires data transformation. So if you want to add a new column or a field to some aspect of your schema, you have to add it everywhere, essentially, if you're doing like type checking and things like that. Whereas in our world, you essentially just add it to the GraphQL schema, and GraphQL does its enforcement, and then everywhere else is just, you have to do any transformation. And so if you just think about that repeated over how often you do make changes, especially when we're launching things, just is an enormous, not necessarily velocity increaser. It's just a lot of stuff you don't have to do, and a lot of stuff that blocks developers that is just can't block them because it's not there.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Joe, appreciate the time as always. We love to catch up with you. We need to do it more frequently. We'd love to kind of, catch up on how the new company's going, say in 6-9 months or whatever. But thank you so much for, number one, being part of this 4 for 400 series. We always love having your insight into it. And folks, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. We hope we got some insight into kind of the future of how applications are being developed, maybe how smaller companies are going to be disrupting or reshaping larger industries. So thanks to Joe, and for Aaron and myself, we're going to wrap it up for this week. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks to everybody for telling a friend and following the show. And with that, we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.